It always starts the same way. Darkness, thick and suffocating, presses against me, the air heavy with something I can't name. I'm sitting at a desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside me, and a folder stuffed with papers that feel as though they weigh 1,000 pounds. My hands shake as I flip it open, and every page blurs before I can make sense of the words. Then the voice comes. "Jasper, you're a fool." It echoes, guttural and mocking, sounding both familiar and foreign at once. My throat tightens. I try to respond, but no sound escapes my lips. My fists clench, the leather of the chair creaks beneath me, and then, like clockwork, the revolver appears. Cold steel, polished, waiting. I don't own a gun in real life, but in this dream, it's as real as the breath tearing through my lungs. The words slip out, soft at first, but gaining force, uncontrollable. "I'll end this. I'll destroy them all, even if it kills me." I always wake up at that moment, heart hammering like a drum. Tonight is no different. My chest heaves, damp with sweat. The red glow of the clock blinks 2:17 a.m., taunting me, reminding me of just how little sleep I'll get. Eleanor is beside me, her breathing steady and peaceful, her hand tucked under her cheek. For a moment I feel relief. She's here, she's safe, but it doesn't last. I sit up, the cool air against my skin doing little to calm my nerves. Every fiber of my being tells me to shake her awake, to spill the thoughts swirling like a storm in my head. But I don't. Not anymore. Instead, I step out of bed, the creak of the floorboards almost deafening in the silence of the room. The kitchen is my refuge, a bottle of bourbon waiting for me on the counter like an old friend. I don't bother with a glass, just pour a measure into my palm and let the burn drown out the edges of my torment. I stare at the window, the reflection of a man I barely recognize staring back at me. I look older than I am, the lines on my face deeper, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For all my skills as an auditor, all my training in uncovering the darkest truths, I failed where it mattered most. This isn't just a nightmare, it's a memory, twisted and exaggerated, but a memory nonetheless. 2 years ago, my life fell apart in ways I couldn't have imagined. Eleanor's betrayal shattered me, her lies threaded through with a kind of subtlety that only hindsight makes clear. The house is quiet now, but back then it was filled with the sound of arguments we never finished, the flicker of excuses in her eyes, the half-truths that felt so convincing at the time. They haunt me more than the dream ever could. I grip the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. It doesn't matter how many times I've relived that night. It always feels fresh, raw. There are days I tell myself I've moved on, but the nights tell a different story. Behind me, the sound of the bedroom door creaking open pulls me from my thoughts. Eleanor steps into the faint light, her hair tousled, worry etched into her features. "Another bad dream?" she asks softly, her voice thick with sleep. I nod, not trusting myself to speak. She steps closer, wrapping her arms around me. Her warmth should comfort me, but instead it feels like a weight, a reminder of everything I can no longer trust. "Come back to bed," she whispers, her cheek pressed against my back. I hesitate. The pull of sleep is tempting, but the thought of closing my eyes and returning to that desk, that revolver, is too much. "I just need a minute," I reply, my voice hoarse. She doesn't argue, just squeezes me once before retreating. I watch her disappear into the darkness, her silhouette fading like smoke. Alone again, I pour another measure, staring out into the void beyond the window. The nightmare isn't just a memory. It's a warning. And tonight I can't shake the feeling that something's coming, something worse. There was a time when everything felt right. A time when Eleanor's laughter was the soundtrack to my days and our dreams intertwined so seamlessly that it seemed nothing could break us. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, yet they cling to my memory like a bittersweet ghost. Our home in Charleston was small but perfect for us. It wasn't the kind of place that made magazine covers, but it had character, hardwood floors that creaked in familiar patterns, sunlight streaming through old bay windows that Eleanor insisted on decorating with lavender pots. She loved lavender. Its scent seemed to follow her everywhere, mingling with the subtle notes of her favorite jasmine perfume. Back then, I would come home after long days at the firm, greeted by the warm aroma of her cooking and the sound of her humming in the kitchen. It didn't matter how exhausting my day had been. Her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she saw me, erased every burden I carried. We had plans, beautiful, intricate plans. We'd spent hours sprawled out on the living room floor, sketching out our future like architects of a dream. Eleanor would leave her demanding role at the firm after we had our first child, shifting her energy to our growing family. "Just one," she'd laugh, pressing her hand to my chest as if to settle my overenthusiasm. "One is enough chaos." We had even picked a name. If it was a girl, she'd be Violet, a nod to the lavender Eleanor loved so much. I can't remember when things started to change. At first it was so subtle that I chalked it up to the pressures of her job. Late nights at the office became more frequent, her laughter less so. She seemed tired, distant at times, but I told myself it was temporary. One evening, I surprised her with takeout from her favorite bistro. She was at her desk, papers scattered like a storm had hit her workspace. When I walked in, she startled, slamming her laptop shut. "Sorry," she said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "You scared me." I frowned. Eleanor had never been the type to hide things, but in that moment there was something in her eyes, something guarded. I didn't press her. I should have. Those days I found solace in the little moments we still shared. Movie nights on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, or the lazy Sunday mornings when she'd wrap herself in my arms, mumbling about how much she hated Mondays. I clung to those moments like lifelines, refusing to see the cracks forming in the foundation of our life together. But looking back now, the signs were all there. The missed calls that ended too quickly when I walked into the room, the way she seemed to flinch when I touched her, as if my love had become a burden. I remember the night she first mentioned Alaric. We were having dinner, roast chicken with rosemary, one of her specialties. She was distracted, cutting her food into perfect little squares but hardly eating. "You'd like him," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Who?" I asked, confused. "Alaric, my boss," she replied, her tone casual but her eyes fixed on her plate. "He's got this way of making everyone feel seen. It's refreshing." I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. But now, that name feels like a scar burned into my memory. If I could go back to those moments, I'd ask the questions I was too afraid to voice. I'd hold her a little tighter, kiss her a little longer, and remind her that whatever storm was brewing, we could face it together. But life doesn't give us second chances. It only gives us memories, and mine are painted with the colors of both love and regret. It started with little things, details that seemed insignificant at the time but have etched themselves into my mind like deep grooves. I never imagined they would become the first cracks in the foundation of my life. Eleanor's eyes were different, not in any obvious way, but subtle enough to make my pulse quicken in the silence between us. The way she'd glance away when I spoke, her lips pulled tight like she was trying to hold something back. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something just out of reach. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Stress from work, the looming deadlines at her firm. These were the things I told myself were taking a toll on her. We all have our moments, don't we, when the weight of the world settles on your shoulders and you retreat into yourself. But as days passed, the distance between us grew. I noticed it more when I'd get home from work. The usual dinner didn't come, and instead of her voice calling out, asking me about my day, there was nothing but silence. The house felt too quiet, and my footsteps seemed louder than they ever had before. One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and too many cups of stale coffee, I came home to find her at the kitchen table, her laptop open, papers scattered across the surface. "Eleanor?" I asked softly, trying to break through the stillness. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she closed the laptop a little too quickly. There was a strange hesitance in her actions, and my chest tightened in response. "Hey, sorry," she said with a forced smile. "I was just finishing up some work." I wanted to ask her more, but I didn't. Instead, I shrugged and placed the takeout bag on the counter. She didn't seem to notice, lost in the abyss of her own thoughts. Her smile faded. but not enough for me to truly see the cracks in her eyes. Later that night, as we sat on the couch, a quiet tension settled between us. The television flickered, but neither of us was really watching it. I could feel her body next to mine, but it felt like we were miles apart. The words I wanted to say were stuck in my throat, caught between fear and something worse. Uncertainty. "Jasper," she said, her voice low. "I think I need a little more space. I've been thinking." The words hit me like a slap, though she didn't mean them to. Space? Thinking? What did that even mean? I nodded, trying to hide the knot forming in my stomach. "Yeah, I understand. It's been a lot lately." But something in her expression didn't sit right with me. Her eyes darted away again, avoiding mine. The room felt colder. I hadn't imagined the shift. The next day, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise her, to catch a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with. The front door was unlocked, a little thing that usually signified warmth and trust. But as I stepped inside, the silence greeted me with the same coldness I'd felt the night before. "Eleanor?" I called out, but no answer came. I made my way to the kitchen, where I found her bag on the floor, her shoes carelessly kicked aside. There were signs of a rush, something out of place in the orderly house we had always kept together. I felt a knot in my stomach, tighter now, squeezing with each passing second. And then I saw it. The phone lying face down on the counter, its screen lit up with an unfamiliar number flashing. I froze. I told myself to let it go, that this wasn't me. This wasn't who I was. But my hand reached out anyway, and for a moment I hesitated. When I turned it over, my heart sank. The message was brief, but its meaning was clear. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll make it worth your while." It was signed with just a name, Alaric, the same name Eleanor had mentioned weeks ago. The room seemed to spin as I stood there, staring at the phone, the words blurring in front of my eyes. My breath became shallow, each inhale like a needle to my chest. I had felt the distance. I had sensed something was wrong. But this was the truth I had been dreading, lurking beneath every uncertain glance, every hidden smile. I didn't know what to do next. The man I had been, the man I wanted to be, didn't know how to navigate this moment. Anger, fear, heartbreak, they all rushed in at once, drowning me. I put the phone down, taking a few slow steps back. Eleanor would return soon, and when she did, I would finally have the answers I had been too afraid to ask for. But at that moment, all I could do was stare at the phone, knowing that my life, our life, had just changed forever. I couldn't just sit there and wait. Not anymore. The truth was laid out in front of me like a cruel riddle, and every part of me screamed to find the missing pieces, to confirm the worst. But even as I set my resolve, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind, whispering that maybe I wasn't ready to know the full story. Maybe the truth would be worse than I could imagine. But it didn't matter. I had to know. I hadn't slept properly since the night I found Alaric's message on Eleanor's phone. Each hour that passed felt like a lifetime, every second weighing heavier than the last. I was pacing, endlessly pacing, unable to stop my mind from racing. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there, paralyzed by the truth that was too close, too real. So I did what I knew best. I went to work. I've spent my life piecing together the stories hidden in the details, the secrets buried beneath layers of deception. But this wasn't a case I could handle from behind a desk. No, this was personal, far too personal for that. I had to get my hands dirty, had to track the truth down like a bloodhound with no regard for how much it would tear me apart. I didn't tell anyone, not Victor, not Rowan, no one. There were no comforting words from a friend this time, no shoulder to lean on. This was mine to carry. The first step was simple: follow her. Follow Eleanor as she left the house, pretending everything was fine, pretending nothing had changed. But I knew better now. I knew the truth was waiting for me, just out of sight, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. I followed her at a distance, my car trailing behind hers, a few blocks back, just enough to keep out of view. Each turn she made, each stoplight she passed, made the knot in my stomach tighten more. There was something about seeing her like this, so casual, so unaware, that sent a cold chill down my spine. How had she managed to hide this from me for so long? She pulled into a parking lot and I slowed down, glancing around to make sure no one was following. The lot was mostly empty, but there was a sense of something lurking, something dark in the air. My heart raced, the seconds feeling like hours as I waited for her to exit the car. And then, I saw him. Alaric Duval, the man who had crept into our lives like a shadow, his presence now undeniable. He was standing by his car, his posture relaxed, casual even, as if this was a normal day. I felt my fists clench involuntarily. The man who had taken my wife had woven himself into our world under the guise of professionalism. And now here he was, meeting her in secret, no doubt ready to continue whatever twisted game they had been playing. I forced myself to focus. No time for anger, no time for self-pity. I needed information, proof. I parked a little further away and waited, watching as Eleanor stepped out of her car and walked toward Alaric. She smiled, her face lighting up in a way that I hadn't seen in months. It made my stomach churn. The smile was too familiar. I used to be the one who made her smile like that. I used to be the one who brought light to her eyes. But now here I was, a stranger in my own life, watching as she handed that smile to someone else. They exchanged a few words, their body language so open, so comfortable that it cut me to the core. And then, they embraced. A tight hug that seemed to last just a second too long. In that moment, I felt something in me snap. This wasn't just a business meeting. This wasn't some innocent friendship. This was betrayal. I had been standing there frozen, watching them for what seemed like an eternity when they finally broke apart. Eleanor turned to walk back toward her car, but Alaric lingered. I could see him talking, pressing something into her hand. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. It didn't matter anymore what they said. The damage was done. The trust that had held us together, shattered. The marriage that I thought was solid, crumbled. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. But I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't confront her yet, not until I had everything. Not until I had the proof that would leave no room for denial. With a heavy heart and a mind spinning with rage, I turned and left. The echoes of their laughter haunting me, filling my mind like a constant buzz. I had seen enough. The game was no longer about hope or questions. It was about revenge, and revenge, it seemed, was a path I would soon walk. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, a dense, suffocating fog that wouldn't lift. The weight of what I knew settled on my shoulders, but it wasn't just the knowledge of her betrayal that consumed me. It was the battle inside me, the part of me that wanted to believe in Eleanor, to believe in us, and the part that screamed for revenge, for justice. The two parts fought like a war raging within me, pulling me in opposite directions. I couldn't focus. Every task, no matter how mundane, became a mountain I couldn't climb. I was drowning in thoughts of Eleanor and Alaric, their faces overlapping with memories of our life together. I could hear her laugh, see her eyes light up when she looked at me, and I wondered when it had all started to slip away. When had the trust eroded beneath the surface, invisible to my blind eyes? The worst part was the silence between us, now that the truth had cracked wide open. I would come home to find Eleanor in the kitchen, her back to me, the space between us so vast that I couldn't remember how to bridge it. There was no anger, no shouting, just a cold, quiet distance. She would turn to me, smile, just like she always had, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. I could see it now. I could see the guilt, the regret, but also the fear. Fear that I might see right through her, and that I would. At night the nightmares would come. They weren't the kind of nightmares you could wake from. No, these would slip into my veins like poison, making it hard to tell where the dream ended and reality began. In one, I was sitting in my car watching them. Eleanor and Alaric. They were laughing, talking, so close, too close. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the way their bodies leaned toward each other, the way their hands brushed. I couldn't move. My limbs were heavy, like they were made of stone. My chest ached, the space where my heart had been felt hollow. Then the dream shifted. The car doors locked, and I was trapped inside. I banged on the windows, screaming. But no sound came. The world outside was moving, but I was stuck, helpless. I woke up every night, drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs, my breath shallow and ragged. Eleanor would be lying beside me, untouched by the storm inside my head. She never knew. I couldn't bring myself to wake her up, couldn't tell her that the man she'd married was starting to break. The guilt I felt for being angry with her, for letting the rage fester inside me without confronting it, was overwhelming. But the shame of still loving her despite everything, was even worse. I was torn in ways I never thought possible. My love for her hadn't vanished. It was still there, deep down, buried under layers of bitterness and hurt. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but every time I opened my mouth, the words got stuck. How could I accuse her when I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the truth? What if it was worse than I could imagine? What if the love I thought we shared had never existed at all? In the mornings, I would stare at myself in the mirror, searching for the man I used to be, the man who was confident, who could navigate any case with sharp precision. But now the man staring back at me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. He had the look of someone who had already given up. And then, there were the moments when I saw her, Eleanor, trying in her own way to bridge the gap. She would make an effort to start a conversation, to ask about my day, to share some small part of herself, but it felt hollow. It felt like a performance, something we were both doing to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Every word felt like a lie, like a dance we were both too tired to perform. I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue like this, teetering on the edge of oblivion, neither confronting her nor letting go. I needed to act. The ache in my chest had reached its breaking point, and I knew that if I didn't do something soon, I might drown in the mess of my own emotions. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face the woman I loved. I wasn't ready to confront the truth, no matter how badly I needed to hear it. The nightmare kept coming back, over and over again, a relentless reminder that nothing would ever be the same. I was stuck in my own mind, running in circles, never reaching an end. And maybe that was the worst part, knowing that the truth was waiting for me, but not knowing if I could survive it. The weight of the truth is heavier than you could ever imagine, especially when you've been denying it for so long. I thought I was ready to face it. I thought I had already felt the sting of betrayal, but nothing prepared me for the final blow, the moment when everything I had suspected, feared, and doubted finally coalesced into something undeniable, something I couldn't escape. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, staring at the screen of my laptop, the email thread glaring back at me with brutal clarity. There was no denying what I was seeing. There were no excuses left to make, no more "maybe this is all a misunderstanding" to hide behind. Alaric had sent her the message, the one I had seen her delete the other night. Now, there it was, printed out in black and white, an email sent at 10:03 p.m. after I'd gone to bed. The words were simple, but the meaning was anything but. "Looking forward to tonight. I'll make sure it's worth your while. It's been too long, Eleanor." I had been hoping, praying for a chance to be wrong, for this to somehow be some cruel coincidence. But no, this was real, and with it, my world, our world, came crumbling down. I stared at the screen, the sting of reality cutting through the haze I had been living in. Every doubt, every suspicion, everything I had tried to ignore was now confirmed. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the rush of anger and betrayal swirled inside me like a storm. I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth. And yet, despite everything, despite the fact that this was exactly what I had feared and suspected, there was still a part of me, some twisted part of me, that wanted to pretend it wasn't real. I wanted to tell myself that Eleanor didn't mean it, that maybe Alaric was manipulating her somehow, twisting her feelings, and that she had been weak, maybe even confused. I wanted to believe she hadn't crossed that line, hadn't made the choice to betray everything we had built. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just some innocent flirtation. It was real, and it was happening behind my back. The undeniable evidence was sitting in front of me like a final, irreversible truth. I had to face it, even if it meant facing the ugly, broken pieces of myself that had been shattered along the way. I stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back with force. My heart was racing, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved, the woman I had trusted, become someone who could so easily betray me? My thoughts were a mess, spinning faster than I could keep up with. Part of me wanted to confront her, to walk into the living room, to demand answers, to make her look me in the eye and explain how she could do this. But another part of me, the part that had learned over the years to hold things in, to keep my emotions hidden, wanted to walk away, to say nothing, to take the knowledge and bury it deep inside where it could never hurt me again. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't keep living a lie. I couldn't let this festering wound go unnoticed any longer. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late. Eleanor would be home soon. She wouldn't know what I had discovered. She wouldn't know that I was no longer blind to what was happening right in front of me. And when she walked through that door, I knew it would be the moment everything changed. My breath caught in my chest as I thought about how I was going to handle this. What was the right thing to do? Was there even a right thing anymore? The evidence was irrefutable, but I was still in conflict with myself. A part of me, the man I once was, wanted justice. I wanted to expose her, expose Alaric, to make them pay for what they had done. But then there was the part of me that still loved her, the part of me that didn't want to destroy what little was left of us. The choice felt impossible, but in the end I knew what I had to do. It was time to confront the truth, to stop hiding from it. The past few weeks of doubt and suspicion had led me here, to this point where there was no turning back. Eleanor's betrayal wasn't just something I could brush aside anymore. It was my reality now, and I had to face it, no matter the cost. The rage had been building up inside me like a volcano, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. I had seen it all. The betrayal, the lies, the way Eleanor's smile seemed genuine when it was anything but. But now, it wasn't just the anger that consumed me. It was the need for something deeper, something more visceral. I needed justice. I needed to make them both feel the weight of what they had done to me. The evidence had already shattered the illusion. The email, the moments I had witnessed, everything had painted a picture too clear to ignore. Alaric had to pay for what he did, but it wasn't just about him. It was about Eleanor, about the woman I had loved, the woman who had once been my everything. I couldn't just confront her. That wouldn't be enough. Not after everything she'd done, not after she had ripped apart the trust we'd built together. No. I needed to do more than just speak the words. I needed to make her understand the full depth of my pain, the full extent of her betrayal. It had to be unforgettable. The truth needed to hit her with the same force that had crushed me. I sat at my desk, my hand clenched around a pen, the only sound in the room the rhythmic scratching of ink against paper. I wasn't just planning revenge. No, this was precision. It wasn't enough to simply confront them. I had to expose them, make their secrets public, force them into the open where they could no longer hide. The first step was simple. Gather everything, every email, every text, every note. Nothing could be left out. I went through everything, every scrap of evidence I had found in the past weeks, every word Eleanor and Alaric had exchanged in their secret world. It all needed to be compiled, organized, and ready to go. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I was going to make sure that Eleanor and Alaric both understood the consequences of their actions. I would make it public. It wouldn't just be a quiet confrontation between the three of us. No, I needed to take control of the narrative. I needed to make sure that everyone knew exactly who they were, what they had done, and how far they had crossed the line. The more I thought about it, the more my plan took shape. I could send everything to her boss, make sure the company understood the extent of her betrayal. It wasn't just about me. It was about the damage she had caused to everything we had built together. I'd make sure that Alaric's actions were exposed for what they were, manipulative, predatory, and utterly vile. And Eleanor? She had to face the consequences of her choices, and those consequences wouldn't be easy. But as I put the plan into motion, something strange began to happen. A part of me hesitated. The man I had been, the man who had loved Eleanor with everything he had, felt like he was slipping away. Every time I looked at the evidence, every time I thought about the confrontation, something in me questioned the path I was walking. Was this really justice? Or was it just revenge, pure and simple? I couldn't decide. Part of me wanted to walk away, to find peace, to let go of the anger that had consumed me. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed, that had been humiliated, couldn't let go. I had to finish it. I had to see it through, even if it destroyed me in the process. I walked out of my office, my mind reeling with the weight of what I was about to do. There was no turning back now. The house was quiet when I returned. Eleanor wasn't home yet. I hadn't seen her all day, and the silence between us was suffocating. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching, listening. I could feel the tension building, the space between us growing wider with every passing second. This wasn't the life I wanted. This wasn't the woman I had married. And yet, there she was, somewhere in the house, probably unaware that I knew everything. I had made my decision. There was no turning back now. The plan was set. And when she walked through that door, I would make her see the truth that she had chosen to ignore, to bury, to hide behind her lies. I would make her feel the pain that I had been carrying for far too long. I would make her understand what it meant to break me. It was the night everything had been leading to, the night that would end the torment, the silent war I had been fighting in my own mind. The air was thick with expectation, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. I had put everything in place. The evidence, the plans, the confrontation. All that was left was for her to walk through that door, unaware that the world she thought she knew would be shattered. I hadn't spoken to Eleanor all day. The silence between us had grown unbearable, suffocating. The small exchanges we had made seemed like rehearsed lines in a play neither of us wanted to perform. I had told myself I was prepared for whatever would come next, but the truth was, I wasn't. I had convinced myself that I was ready for the storm, but how could I be? The love I had for her, no matter how fractured, still lingered like a ghost, refusing to leave. But tonight, it was time to stop pretending. It was time to stop wondering if things could somehow go back to normal. The past few weeks had proven that nothing would ever be the same again. Trust had been broken, and nothing, no apology, no explanation, could undo the damage. As I sat in the living room waiting, the clock ticked with agonizing slowness. Each minute felt like an eternity, and every second that passed only deepened the pit in my stomach. I had everything ready, the email, the texts, the photographs, and yet my mind kept spiraling back to the question I had been avoiding. Was this the right thing to do? Did she deserve this? No, she didn't deserve mercy. She had taken that from me when she betrayed everything we had. I had to see this through. I couldn't let her continue to manipulate me, to pretend like everything was fine when I knew the truth. The door clicked open, and Eleanor stepped in. She froze when she saw me sitting there in the dim light, her eyes scanning me as though trying to read the expression on my face. Her face softened in a smile, but I didn't return it. I couldn't. She took a few hesitant steps forward, the tension thick between us, and I could feel my pulse quicken. She was here. The moment had arrived. "Jasper?" Her voice was soft, unsure. "What's going on? You look different." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I motioned to the seat across from me, the papers scattered across the coffee table, the digital files open on the screen in front of me. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence was clear. Her eyes flicked to the table, then back to me, her body stiffening as she understood. The guilt flashed across her face, but it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something else. Fear. Fear that she had been caught. Fear of what I was about to do. "Sit down, Eleanor," I said, my voice low but steady. "It's time we talk." She hesitated but complied, sitting down across from me, her hands twisting in her lap. I couldn't look at her, not like this, not with the lies still hanging between us. I had loved her once, truly, but now? Now I was numb. "You've been seeing him, haven't you?" The words came out sharper than I expected, the raw pain in my chest spilling out into the air. Her face paled, her mouth opening and closing as though the words were caught in her throat. "Jasper, Don't," I interrupted, my eyes locking onto hers. "Don't try to explain. I don't need to hear it. I've seen the emails, the messages, the lies." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment I thought she might break down, might beg for forgiveness. But there was no apology that could fix this, no words that would make it right. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why?" The question escaped before I could stop it, the anger creeping into my voice. "Why did you let him in? Why did you let this happen?" She looked away, her gaze fixed on the floor, her shoulders trembling. "I was scared," she said softly. "Scared of losing everything. Scared of us, of being stuck." I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my throat. "You were scared? You thought betraying me, lying to me was the answer." She didn't answer. She couldn't. And in that silence I made my decision. "I'm done, Eleanor." The words were final, and the coldness in my voice matched the finality of my thoughts. "This is over." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't feel the familiar pang of sympathy. I had given her every chance to come back, every opportunity to be honest, and she had chosen to keep walking down this path. There was no coming back from this. "You're fired from everything," I continued, my voice steady now, unyielding. "You don't get to destroy our life and walk away without consequences." She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. I didn't need to hear the excuses. There were no excuses that could justify this. "This is the truth now, Eleanor, and you'll have to live with it, just like I will." As she stood up, her face flushed with embarrassment and regret, I felt nothing. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was gone. And in her place stood a stranger. She left without a word, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the house we once shared. And as the door closed behind her, I realized that everything had changed. I wasn't the same man anymore, and neither was she. The silence after she left was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that came with peace, but one filled with the weight of all that had been left unsaid. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as though the walls of the house were closing in on me, trapping me in the aftermath of my own decisions. I had made my choice, and now there was no going back. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cold remnants of the confrontation lingering in my chest. My mind raced, replaying the words that had passed between us, each one sharper than the last, each one carving deeper into the wound I had been trying to ignore for so long. The hardest part wasn't the decision to end things, to confront the truth. No. The hardest part was realizing how little I knew the person I had once trusted with my entire heart. Eleanor had been my world, my anchor in a sea of chaos, and now she was a stranger. I stood up, my legs unsteady, as if the ground itself was unsure of my place on it. I moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My life, my future, my sense of self. They were all unraveling piece by piece, leaving me exposed in a way I had never felt before. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I knew who it was. "Jasper." Victor's voice came through, urgent but soft. "Are you all right?" I didn't answer right away. What was there to say? Was I all right? Could anyone be all right after everything that had happened? "I'm fine," I finally said, my voice sounding far more hollow than I had intended. "Just trying to figure things out." There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation. Victor knew me too well. He knew when I was lying, when I was hiding behind a mask of control. "Jasper, you can't do this alone. Whatever happened, we can talk through it." I wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the pain, the anger, the confusion that had taken root inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. "I need to handle this," I said, my tone firm, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. "I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk." There was no response from Victor, but I could hear the worry in his silence. He was my closest friend, the one person who had always been there, but even he couldn't understand the depth of what I was going through. No one could. The truth was, I wasn't just dealing with the pain of Eleanor's betrayal. It was everything. It was the crushing realization that I had been living in a lie for so long, that the person I had trusted the most had chosen to betray me in the most intimate, painful way possible. I was reeling, and every attempt to regain my footing only made me stumble further. I spent the rest of the night in the same place, lost in my thoughts, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Eleanor hadn't returned, and part of me was thankful for that. I didn't know what I would do if she walked back through the door. What could I say to her? What could she possibly say to me? It was the next morning when the phone call came. "Mr. Monroe." The voice on the other end was cold, businesslike. "This is Agent Calloway. We need to speak with you about an ongoing investigation." I froze. Agent Calloway? The FBI? My heart skipped a beat as a cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why was the FBI involved? What had Eleanor done? "I'm on my way," I said, my voice suddenly flat, a numbness taking over. When I arrived at the office, Agent Calloway was waiting for me in a small, sterile conference room. His expression was serious, too serious. I felt a sudden sense of dread settle in my stomach. "Mr. Monroe, we've been investigating some irregularities at DCNH," Calloway began, not wasting any time. "We have reason to believe that your wife, Eleanor, may have been involved in some of these activities. We need to ask you a few questions." I blinked, trying to make sense of his words. "My wife?" I choked out. "What are you talking about?" "There are financial discrepancies," he continued, his voice steady but unyielding. "We believe Eleanor may have been implicated in a broader scheme. We need to know what you know about her involvement." My mind was spinning. I had known Eleanor was keeping things from me, but this was something far darker. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Agent Calloway didn't flinch. "We'll be in touch. If you remember anything else, contact us immediately." The room felt like it was closing in around me as I left. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was bigger than that, far bigger. And as I drove home, the weight of it all settled over me like a cold, unrelenting fog. Eleanor hadn't just destroyed our relationship. She had opened up a Pandora's box that I couldn't close. It's strange the way life works. You can lose everything you thought you knew, your identity, your dreams, your sense of self, and yet somehow you find a way to pick up the pieces and start again. That's what I had to do. I had no choice but to rebuild from the ashes of everything that had fallen apart. The pain of what I had lost still lingered in the edges of my mind, but it was beginning to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in months: hope. I remember the first day I stepped out into the city after all the chaos. The sun seemed brighter, as if the world was finally letting me breathe again. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel suffocated by the weight of my past. It was like I had been given a second chance to find myself, to discover who I was without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. I kept my distance from the people who had once been part of my life: Victor, Rowan, even Emery Calloway, who had only been a cold reminder of everything I had tried to escape. I needed to be alone. I needed to hear my own thoughts again, to reclaim the parts of me that had been silenced by the storm of Eleanor's betrayal. I focused on work. For the first time, I threw myself into it completely. There were cases to solve, mysteries to uncover, and the thrill of it all grounded me. It was no longer just a job. It was my refuge, the one place where I could control the narrative, where nothing was out of my hands. The work kept me busy, and in its own way, it gave me a sense of purpose again. And then there was her, Rowan, the investigator who had always been there in the background. Her steady presence and anchor I had never fully appreciated until now. After months of silence, she reached out. "Jasper, we need to talk. Let's meet." I wasn't sure what to expect when I saw her, but when we sat down, her eyes were kind, understanding. There was no judgment, no pity, just a quiet recognition of the pain I had been through. "I know it's been a rough time," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you don't have to carry this alone. You've done enough. You don't need to punish yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In all the weeks I had spent wallowing in my own bitterness, I hadn't stopped to think about the man I had become in the process. I had been so consumed by revenge, by the desire to make Eleanor feel what I felt, that I had lost sight of the person I once was. Rowan's words reminded me of something I had forgotten. There was still goodness in me, still the potential to heal. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. But I need to move forward, don't I? She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing to live without being tied to the past. You have to free yourself from it, Jasper. The weight I had been carrying, so heavy, so crushing, began to lift piece by piece. I didn't have to keep punishing myself. I didn't have to keep holding on to the anger and the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. The next few months were a blur, but in the best way possible. Slowly but surely, I found my way back to who I was. Before the betrayal, before the pain. I made new choices, took new risks, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive again. I moved into a new apartment, smaller, cozier, but it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe without the weight of the past hanging over me. I didn't need the reminders of what had happened. I needed peace. Then came the day when I met someone new. Her name was Sophia. She was nothing like Eleanor. She didn't have the intensity or the sharpness that had once drawn me to my wife. No, Sophia was different. She was calm, steady, and kind in a way that made me feel like I could exhale for the first time in years. We went for coffee, just a casual meet-up, but there was something about her, something genuine, that pulled me in. And for the first time since everything had crumbled, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, I could feel something again. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't sure if I was ready for all that love would entail, not after everything I had been through. But I was ready to try. For the first time, I was open to the possibility of happiness again, of a future that didn't have to be defined by the past. So I took a chance. I took a chance on myself, on Sophia, on starting over. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't expect it to come so suddenly, but there it was. The phone call, the message, the reminder of everything I had tried so hard to leave behind. Eleanor was back, and somehow I knew this was the moment when I had to confront everything that had been lurking in the shadows. It had been months since I'd last heard from her. Months of rebuilding, of moving forward. I had done the work, tried to heal the wounds she had left. But the scars, the memories, they were still there, and I knew that facing her now would either be the final step toward letting go or the beginning of yet another chapter of pain. The call came on a rainy afternoon. I had been at home, sitting by the window, lost in my thoughts. The sound of raindrops hitting the glass seemed to match the quiet storm inside me. When the phone rang, I didn't need to check the number. I knew it was her. Jasper. Eleanor's voice was soft, hesitant, as if she hadn't spoken in years, and maybe in some ways she hadn't. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. What was there to say? How could I look at her and not see the woman who had betrayed me so deeply? The woman whose lies had shattered everything I had worked so hard to build. But despite all the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, something inside me, something buried deep, was still connected to her. And that terrified me. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I said, my voice rough with the emotion I had been keeping locked up. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when she spoke again it was with a quiet desperation. I've been thinking about everything, about what I did. I know I can't undo it, but I need to explain. Please, just give me a chance to say I'm sorry. Her words hit harder than I had expected. I had convinced myself that I was over it, that I had moved on, but hearing her voice, hearing the pain in it, brought it all flooding back. The anger, the betrayal, the nights spent wondering what went wrong, what I had missed. It all came rushing in. I don't know if you can fix this, I said, my voice faltering despite myself. I don't know if there's anything you can say that will change what happened, but maybe I can listen. She was quiet for a moment. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a chance to explain, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you, Jasper. I was lost, and I made choices I can never take back." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking into my chest. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to feel anything for her. She had destroyed everything, and I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. But I knew that if I didn't face her, if I didn't listen to what she had to say, I would carry this weight with me forever. "I'm listening," I said, my voice quieter now, the numbness creeping in. She told me everything, about the pressure she had felt, about the lies she had told herself to justify what she had done. How, in the end, she had realized she wasn't just betraying me, but herself, too. It wasn't the kind of apology that would fix everything, but it was enough to make me see something I hadn't seen before. Guilt. Not just for what she had done, but for the way she had lost herself in it all. "I never thought I'd hurt you this way," she said, her voice thick with regret. "I'm so sorry, Jasper. So sorry for everything." The words didn't undo the past, didn't erase the scars, but they were the first step in a journey I hadn't expected, a journey toward understanding, toward closure, toward forgiveness, though not for her, not yet. "I've spent so much time hating you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I've spent so much time being angry, and I don't know if I can ever truly forgive you, but I need to let go of this. I need to face it, face you, so I can finally move on." She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. We both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But somehow, in that moment, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I could finally let go of the past and take the next step forward, even if it meant doing it alone. "I hope you find peace, Eleanor," I said quietly. "I hope you find your way." And with that, I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the conversation settling over me. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, they were all still there. But for the first time, I didn't feel like they were suffocating me. I had faced it. I had faced her. And now I could finally take that next step, even if I wasn't sure what that next step looked like yet. The past would always be there, a part of who I was, but it no longer defined me. I never imagined that a new beginning would come quietly. After everything that had happened, Eleanor's betrayal, the long months of pain, the rebuilding, and the endless nights of doubt, I expected a grand moment, a sweeping change that would somehow make everything right. But that wasn't what happened. It was quieter than that. It was subtle, like the first rays of light breaking through the dark, thick clouds that had consumed me for so long. I woke up that morning to the smell of coffee. It wasn't the kind of comforting aroma I had known in the past, when Eleanor would brew a pot before I even opened my eyes, but something different. This was my own coffee, brewed with care, the way I liked it. Strong, dark, and just a little bitter. I had moved into this small apartment not long ago. It was nothing like the home we had built together, but it felt like mine. It wasn't much, but the space was mine to shape, mine to inhabit. The walls were bare, not filled with memories of what had been. It was a blank slate, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The clutter of emotions, of pain, of memories that had consumed me for so long was fading. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was quieter. The anger had lost its sharp edge. The grief had become more manageable. I didn't feel the constant ache of what I had lost anymore. Instead, I felt hope. I walked to the small kitchen, taking in the simplicity of it all. The space was small, but I liked it. It gave me room to breathe, room to think. I hadn't realized how stifling my old life had become until I had the chance to step away. The clutter of the past was no longer suffocating me, no longer drowning me. Sophia had called me that morning. I hadn't expected it, but there was something about her voice that felt grounding. She was kind, steady, and in a way that steadiness felt like something I could lean into. It wasn't that I was looking for another relationship. I wasn't. But I had missed the warmth of companionship, the kind that wasn't tied to betrayal, to lies. Sophia offered that. "I was thinking about getting lunch. Want to join me?" Her voice was light, unassuming, and for the first time in a long time I felt the urge to say yes. Yes, I found myself saying. It was as simple as that. It wasn't the big, dramatic shift I'd been expecting, but it was a step forward, a small but significant step. As I got dressed, I glanced at the window where sunlight filtered through the blinds. It was the first morning in a long time that felt like it held promise. I had spent so much of my time in the past, consumed by the storm of emotions that Eleanor had left behind, that I had forgotten what it was like to just breathe, to just exist without the weight of the world on my shoulders. It wasn't easy. It wasn't as if the past had suddenly become a distant memory. It lingered, like a shadow, reminding me of what had happened. But I was learning to live with it, to move forward despite it, and that felt like progress, real progress. When I met Sophia for lunch, it was simple. We didn't talk about heavy things, didn't discuss the past or what had led us to this point. We just talked. About food, about life, about the little things that made up the present. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like I could just be. I could just exist. We didn't make any grand promises, and I didn't expect anything from her except kindness. It was a new feeling for me, this simplicity. It felt safe. It felt good. The rest of the day passed without any dramatic revelations. There were no earth-shattering moments of clarity. It was just the beginning of something new, something different. And that was enough for me. I wasn't ready to completely forget the past. I didn't know if I ever would. But as I walked back to my apartment that evening, the weight of what had happened seemed lighter. The pieces of my life that had been broken were no longer scattered. They were still there, but I was starting to put them back together. A new beginning wasn't about erasing the past. It was about living with it, learning from it, and finding a way forward. It was about embracing what came next, even if I didn't have all the answers. And as I stood in front of my apartment door that evening, the sun setting softly behind me, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was okay. Maybe not perfect, but okay. And that was enough. What do you think of Jasper's journey of betrayal and redemption? From which region are you watching this video? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And make sure to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.